5-year-old Gerald Patterson, heir to a multi-million-dollar empire, had never taken a single step in his life. Despite his father's wealth funding the world's best specialists, the boy could only crawl across the marble floors of their Manhattan mansion. When desperate CEO Jonathan Patterson hired Maria Santos, a humble housekeeper from El Salvador, nobody expected miracles. But Maria carried a devastating secret from her own past. She had lost her own son to the same mysterious condition. In a moment of pure desperation, she tried one simple technique her grandmother had taught her decades ago. What happened next shocked the medical world and revealed a truth so profound it would destroy everything the Patterson family believed about love, sacrifice, and the power of a mother's intuition. Please like this video if you want to hear more incredible true stories, and comment below what you think happened next. Your engagement helps us share these amazing tales of hope and transformation. Jonathan Patterson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, watching the city wake up 30 floors below. At 42, he commanded a tech empire worth $800 million. But he felt powerless as he watched his 5-year-old son Gerald crawl across the Italian marble floor behind him. "Daddy, look!" Gerald's voice rang out with innocent joy as he demonstrated his latest accomplishment, crawling faster than ever before, his small hands making soft, slapping sounds against the cold stone. Jonathan's heart clenched. 3 years since the diagnosis that had turned their world upside down. A typical cerebral palsy, the doctors called it, a condition so rare that even the world's leading neurologists scratched their heads in confusion. Gerald's mind was brilliant. He could recite entire books, solve complex puzzles, and spoke 3 languages fluently, but his legs remained stubbornly unresponsive, trapped in a mystery that millions of dollars couldn't solve. "That's wonderful, buddy," Jonathan said, forcing brightness into his voice as he knelt down. Gerald crawled toward him with determination, his blue eyes sparkling with the same intelligence that had built the Patterson fortune. The morning routine began like every other. Gerald's physical therapist, Dr. Martinez, arrived at 8 sharp. She was the 15th specialist they'd hired in 2 years, a kind woman from UCLA who specialized in pediatric motor disorders. But after 3 months of intensive sessions, Gerald remained earthbound. "Mr. Patterson, I need to be honest with you," Dr. Martinez said quietly after their session. "I've exhausted every conventional approach. Gerald's case is unlike anything I've encountered in 20 years of practice." Jonathan felt the familiar weight of helplessness settle on his shoulders. There has to be something else, someone else. Dr. Martinez packed her equipment slowly. "Perhaps it's time to consider that Gerald's path might be different from what we expected. He's remarkably bright, adaptable and happy. Sometimes acceptance, no." The word came out sharper than Jonathan intended. "I won't give up on him." Later that evening, as Gerald played with his toy cars on the living room floor, Jonathan made another call to his assistant. "Schedule appointments with every specialist in Switzerland, Germany, Japan. I don't care what it costs." But Gerald, wise beyond his 5 years, crawled over and tugged on his father's expensive trousers. "Daddy sad?" he asked, his small face wrinkled with concern. Jonathan lifted his son onto his lap, marveling at how light he felt, how fragile. "Daddy just wants you to run and play like other kids." Gerald considered this seriously. "But I can crawl really, really fast. And I can think really, really good. Maybe that's my special power." That night, as Jonathan tucked Gerald into bed, he made a silent promise. He would find a way. He had to. What Jonathan didn't know was that 3,000 miles away, in a small village outside San Salvador, a woman named Maria Santos was packing her few belongings, preparing for a journey that would change all their lives forever. Maria Santos had learned long ago that grief never truly disappears. It simply changes shape. As she folded her worn clothes into a battered suitcase, Her fingers lingered on a small blue shirt that would never be worn again. Her son Diego would have been 7 now, the same age as the boy she'd soon care for in New York. "Are you sure about this, Misha?" her mother asked from the doorway, worry etched deep in her weathered face. "It's so far away, and you've been through so much." Maria held up the employment letter that had arrived 2 weeks ago, an opportunity to work as a live-in housekeeper for a wealthy family in Manhattan. The salary would support her entire extended family for years, but more than money, she needed to escape the memories that haunted every corner of their small house. "I have to try, Mama," Maria said softly. "Diego would want me to help other children." The next morning, Maria said goodbye to the only life she'd ever known. 28 years old, with calloused hands and a heart full of unspoken pain, she boarded a plane to a world she could barely imagine. Jonathan Patterson's assistant had found Maria through an exclusive domestic agency that catered to Manhattan's elite. Her references from local families were impeccable, patient with children, hard-working, and completely trustworthy. What the agency didn't mention, and what Maria never spoke about, was why she'd left her previous position caring for a disabled child in San Salvador. 3 days later, Maria stood in the marble foyer of the Patterson mansion, overwhelmed by its sheer grandeur. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns on walls lined with priceless artwork. But it was the sound of small hands slapping against marble that drew her attention. "This is Gerald," Jonathan said, his voice tight with the strain she'd grown to recognize in parents of special needs children. "Gerald, this is Miss Maria. She's going to help take care of you." Gerald stopped crawling and looked up at Maria with curious blue eyes. Something passed between them, a recognition that neither could name. Maria knelt down slowly, bringing herself to his level. "Hola, Gerald," she said softly. "Cómo estás?" "Hola, Miss Maria," Gerald replied in perfect Spanish, his face lighting up. "Estoy bien." "But I can only crawl. I can't walk like other kids." Maria's breath caught. The matter-of-fact way Gerald spoke about his condition, the intelligence shining in his eyes, the way he moved with such determination, it all reminded her achingly of Diego in his final months. "Everyone moves in their own way," Maria said gently. "Show me how fast you can go." Gerald immediately demonstrated his crawling skills, racing around the living room with impressive speed while chattering about his toys, his books, and his favorite TV shows. Maria watched carefully, noticing things the doctors had missed, the way Gerald favored his right side slightly, how he unconsciously avoided putting weight on his left leg, the subtle compensation patterns his body had developed. That evening, after Gerald was asleep, Jonathan found Maria in the kitchen, studying a medical report. "Those are Gerald's files," he said. "I hope you don't mind. I thought it might help you understand his condition better." Maria looked up with dark eyes that held depths of experience he couldn't fathom. "Mr. Patterson, may I ask you something? When did Gerald last try to stand?" The doctors said it was pointless. His muscle tone. But when did he last try? Jonathan realized he didn't know. Somewhere along the way, everyone had simply accepted that Gerald would crawl, including Gerald himself. That night, Maria lay in her small room adjacent to the kitchen, staring at the ceiling. She thought about her grandmother's words, spoken in their native tongue decades ago. Sometimes the body forgets how to remember. Sometimes it just needs someone to remind it of what it already knows. In her suitcase, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was a small leather pouch containing herbs her grandmother had given her before she died. Maria had used them once before, with miraculous results, but that was a lifetime ago, before tragedy had stolen her faith in miracles. Now, listening to the soft sounds of Gerald's breathing through the baby monitor, Maria wondered if she had the courage to believe in miracles again. Gerald's routine had remained unchanged for 3 years, but Maria's arrival shifted something fundamental in the household's rhythm. Unlike previous caregivers who approached him with clinical detachment or overwhelming sympathy, Maria treated Gerald like any other bright 5-year-old who happened to move differently. "Today we explore," Maria announced on her third morning, watching Gerald navigate his breakfast with impressive dexterity. "This house is too big for crawling everywhere. We need better solutions." She spent the morning studying the mansion's layout with Gerald as her enthusiastic tour guide. The boy showed her secret crawling routes he'd developed, smooth pathways between rooms that avoided thick carpets and furniture legs. His adaptation skills were remarkable. But Maria noticed something troubling. "Gerald," she said as they reached the grand staircase, "do you remember ever trying to climb stairs?" Gerald shook his head. "Daddy carries me. The elevator is for grown-ups, only when Daddy's not home." That afternoon, while Gerald napped, Maria called the physical therapy office and requested Gerald's complete treatment history. What she discovered made her stomach turn. Every single intervention had focused on strengthening his legs while he remained horizontal or seated. No one had attempted vertical weight-bearing in over 18 months. When Jonathan returned from work that evening, he found Maria and Gerald in the living room. Gerald was lying on his back, while Maria gently moved his legs in slow, deliberate patterns. "What are you doing?" Jonathan asked, loosening his tie. "Your son's muscles remember more than anyone realizes," Maria said, continuing the gentle movements. "But they've been sleeping too long." Gerald giggled as Maria's hands worked. "It feels funny, Daddy, like my legs are waking up." Jonathan sat down beside them, watching Maria's technique. Her touch was different from the therapist's, less clinical, more intuitive. "Where did you learn to do that?" Maria's hands paused for just a moment. "My grandmother was a curandera, a healer. She taught me that bodies have wisdom doctors sometimes forget to ask about." That night, after Gerald was asleep, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She retrieved the leather pouch from her suitcase and carefully examined its contents. Dried herbs her grandmother had harvested from the mountains of El Salvador, not for medicine, but for something far more precious: hope. The next morning, Maria prepared a warm bath for Gerald with a few pinches of the herbs mixed in. The aromatic water filled the bathroom with an earthy, ancient scent. "This smells like adventure," Gerald said as Maria helped him into the tub. "My grandmother used to say that some plants remember what our bodies forget," Maria explained, supporting Gerald's back as he relaxed in the warm water. As they soaked, Maria began telling Gerald stories about her childhood in El Salvador, tales of children who overcame impossible obstacles through courage and determination. Gerald listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions that revealed his remarkable intelligence. "Miss Maria," Gerald said after a particularly exciting story about a boy who climbed the highest mountain, "do you think I could climb something too someday?" Maria felt her heart squeeze with familiar pain and unfamiliar hope. "I think you can do anything you set your mind to, mi niño." But it was what happened next that made Maria believe in miracles again. As Gerald listened to her stories, his legs began moving unconsciously under the water, not the deliberate movements of therapy, but natural, reflexive responses to the emotions her tales evoked. For the first time in 3 years, Gerald's body was remembering what it felt like to want to move toward something, not just away from falling. Maria said nothing, but made careful mental notes. That night, she called her mother in El Salvador. "Mama, I need you to tell me everything Abuela said about the mountain herbs. Everything." What her mother shared over that long-distance call would soon turn the Patterson family's world upside down. Dr. Elizabeth Chen had been Gerald's neurologist for 2 years, and she'd never seen anything like what greeted her during his monthly appointment that Friday morning. Gerald crawled into her office with his usual enthusiasm, but something was different in his movement patterns, more fluid, more confident, almost eager. "Good morning, Gerald, Doctor," Chen said, settling into her chair. "How have you been feeling?" "Great. Miss Maria tells the best stories, and she makes my legs feel tingly in the bath," Gerald announced with 5-year-old candor. Dr. Chen's eyes immediately shifted to Maria, who had accompanied Gerald to the appointment. "Tingly?" Maria chose her words carefully. "I've been using some traditional relaxation techniques, warm baths with natural aromatics. Gerald seems to respond well to the sensory stimulation." During the examination, Dr. Chen documented several notable changes. Gerald's muscle tone had improved significantly in his lower extremities. His reflexes, while still abnormal, showed increased responsiveness. Most remarkably, when she performed the standard reflex tests, Gerald's legs exhibited movements she hadn't observed in previous visits. "Mr. Patterson, I need to ask, have you changed anything else in Gerald's routine? Diet, medications, other therapies?" Jonathan, who had left an important board meeting to attend the appointment, shook his head. "Just Maria. She started working with us 2 weeks ago." Dr. Chen made extensive notes. "I'd like to schedule more frequent monitoring. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I haven't seen improvements like this in any of Gerald's previous evaluations." That afternoon, Maria received a phone call that would test her resolve. Her sister Rosa called from El Salvador, sobbing. "Maria, I found Diego's medical records when I was cleaning out the old house. There's something you need to know about his condition. The doctors here, they made a mistake." "Wussies!" Maria's blood ran cold as Rosa read from documents she'd discovered hidden in their mother's papers. Diego's paralysis hadn't been permanent, as the doctors had told them. It was a rare inflammatory condition that often resolved itself within months, if treated correctly. The traditional remedies their grandmother had insisted on using weren't just folklore. They were medically sound treatments that could have saved her son. "The herbs, Maria. Abuela's mountain herbs. They reduce inflammation in the nervous system. The doctors here just didn't know." Maria dropped the phone and rushed to the bathroom, where she found Gerald splashing happily in his evening bath, surrounded by the same herbs that could have saved her son's life. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She sat by Gerald's bedside, watching his peaceful face in the moonlight streaming through the window. The boy who reminded her so much of Diego was responding to treatments that might have changed everything for her own child. By 3 a.m., Maria had made a decision that would either save Gerald or destroy her own heart all over again. She was going to push harder with the traditional treatments, but this time she wouldn't lose another child to the ignorance of modern medicine's blind spots. The next morning, Jonathan found Maria in the kitchen at dawn, grinding fresh herbs with an antique mortar and pestle she'd somehow acquired. "Maria, is everything all right?" She looked up with eyes that held a determination he'd never seen before. "Mr. Patterson, I need to ask you something very important. Do you trust me with Gerald's care?" Something in her tone made Jonathan sit down. "Of course. Why?" "Because I'm going to try something that might seem unconventional, but I believe it could help Gerald in ways the doctors haven't considered." Jonathan studied her face, the resolve, the pain, the hope all mingled together. "What are you talking about?" Maria took a deep breath. "I want to teach Gerald to believe his legs can hold him, not through therapy or exercises, but through something deeper, through the same faith that helps children overcome impossible things every day." What Jonathan didn't know was that Maria had spent the dark hours before dawn researching everything she could find about Gerald's specific condition. and what she'd discovered would soon force them all to confront a truth that would change their understanding of healing, hope, and the power of a mother's love to transcend the boundaries of medicine itself. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in December, 3 weeks after Maria's middle-of-the-night revelation. Gerald was having his usual morning bath when Maria decided to try something that went against every medical protocol she'd been taught to respect. "Gerald, mi amor," she said softly, kneeling beside the tub. "I want to try something different today, but I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" Gerald nodded eagerly. Over the past month, Maria had become his favorite person in the world. She told the most amazing stories, made him laugh until his stomach hurt, and somehow made his legs feel alive in ways he couldn't explain. Maria had prepared the bath with a stronger concentration of her grandmother's herbs, not enough to be harmful, but enough to maximize the anti-inflammatory properties Rosa had described. She'd also brought something else, a small wooden stool that she'd secretly ordered online. "Today we're going to play a game," Maria said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We're going to pretend you're a brave knight who needs to stand up to see over the castle wall." Gerald's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? But Miss Maria, I can't stand up." "Says who?" Maria challenged gently. "Have you tried recently? Not in therapy, not with doctors watching, but really tried because you wanted to see something wonderful." She positioned the wooden stool at the end of the tub, its surface level with the water. Then she stood up and moved to where Gerald couldn't see her clearly. "There's something amazing up here that I want to show you," Maria said, holding up a small kaleidoscope she'd bought at a toy store. "But you can only see it if you're tall enough. The magic only works when you're standing." Gerald stared at the kaleidoscope, his curiosity overwhelming his learned limitations. "What kind of magic?" "The kind that shows you all the beautiful places you're going to visit someday. All the adventures waiting for you, but you have to stand up to see them." For several long minutes, Gerald remained sitting in the warm, herb-scented water, looking longingly at the kaleidoscope. Maria waited, her heart pounding, knowing she was asking him to overcome 3 years of accepted impossibility. Then Gerald did something that made Maria's breath catch. He shifted forward and placed his hands on the wooden stool. "Will you help me?" he whispered. "I'll help you balance," Maria said carefully. "But the standing, that has to come from you. From your legs remembering what they know how to do." What happened next defied every medical opinion Gerald had ever received. With Maria's hands providing only the lightest touch for balance, Gerald slowly, gradually, miraculous, pushed himself up from the water. His legs, strengthened by weeks of herb baths and gentle manipulation, trembled but held. For 30 seconds, Gerald Patterson stood. "I can see it," he gasped, looking through the kaleidoscope at a burst of colors that seemed to dance just for him. "Miss Maria, I can see the magic." Then his legs gave out, and he sank back into the water, but he was laughing with pure joy. "I did it! I stood up! Did you see me stand up?" Maria was crying, tears of joy, relief, and heartbreak all mixed together. "I saw you, mi niño, I saw you." That evening, when Jonathan came home, Gerald could barely contain his excitement. "Daddy! Daddy! I stood up today! I really stood up!" Jonathan looked at Maria, who nodded quietly. He stood for 30 seconds. His legs supported his full weight. Jonathan felt the world shift around him. That's impossible," the doctors said. "The doctors," Maria said softly, "don't know everything." That night, Jonathan called Dr. Chen to report what had happened. Her reaction was everything Maria had feared. "Mr. Patterson, I need to see Gerald immediately. If someone has been pushing him beyond safe limits, we need to assess for potential injury. What you're describing contradicts every evaluation we've conducted." The next morning, Dr. Chen arrived at the Patterson mansion with 2 colleagues and a portable examining unit. What they discovered would either validate Maria's approach or end her time with the Patterson family forever. But neither Gerald nor Maria knew that Jonathan had also made another call to a private investigator, asking them to research everything they could find about Maria Santos's background in El Salvador. What that investigation would uncover about Diego, Maria's lost son, and the real reason she'd left her home country would soon test everyone's faith in miracles, truth, and the lengths a mother will go to save a child. Dr. Chen's emergency evaluation took place in the Patterson mansion's living room, transformed into a makeshift medical facility with portable equipment and 3 skeptical neurologists. Gerald, oblivious to the tension, chatted happily with the doctors while they conducted their tests. "Show them, Miss Maria," Gerald said excitedly. "Show them how I can stand up." But Maria noticed the doctor's expressions, clinical doubt mixed with concern. They weren't here to celebrate Gerald's progress. They were here to investigate whether she'd done something dangerous. "Gerald, sweetheart," Dr. Chen said gently. "We're going to do some special tests first, okay? Then maybe we can see your standing." For 2 hours, they put Gerald through extensive neurological examinations, reflexes, muscle tone, coordination tests, cognitive assessments. Maria watched from the corner, her hands clenched, as they documented everything with scientific precision. When the tests concluded, Dr. Chen asked to speak with Jonathan privately. Maria saw them disappear into his study, their voices low but urgent. Through the partially opened door, she caught fragments that made her heart sink. Highly irregular improvements. Potential safety concerns. Recommend immediate supervised evaluation. Unknown treatments could cause long-term damage. Gerald, meanwhile, crawled over to Maria and tugged on her skirt. "Why do the doctors look worried? I feel really good." "They just want to make sure you're healthy, mi amor," Maria said, but her voice betrayed her anxiety. 20 minutes later, Jonathan emerged from the study with an expression Maria couldn't read. The doctors began packing their equipment while exchanging meaningful glances. "Mr. Patterson," Dr. Chen said formally, "we'll have our evaluation report ready tomorrow. In the meantime, I strongly recommend suspending any alternative treatments until we can properly assess Gerald's condition." After the doctors left, the mansion felt eerily quiet. Gerald had been sent to his room for a nap, leaving Jonathan and Maria alone in the living room, where just hours before, hope had filled the air. "Maria," Jonathan said slowly, "I need you to tell me exactly what you've been doing with Gerald. Everything." Maria knew this moment would come. She'd seen the fear in the doctor's eyes, fear of the unknown, of treatments they couldn't categorize or control. She'd also seen it before, in El Salvador, when Diego's condition had begun improving with her grandmother's remedies. "The herbs help reduce inflammation in his nervous system," Maria said quietly. "The warm baths increase circulation. The gentle exercises awaken muscle memory, and the belief that he can heal gives his body permission to try." Jonathan ran his hands through his hair. "The doctors are concerned that you might be pushing him too hard, that these improvements might not be real or worse, that you might be causing damage we can't see yet." "And what do you think?" Maria asked. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment. "I think I've watched my son crawl for 5 years, while the world's best doctors told me to accept it. And I think in 3 weeks with you, he stood up for the first time in his life." That evening, Maria's phone rang. It was her sister Rosa calling with news that would complicate everything. "Maria, you need to know. Someone from America called here today. They were asking questions about you, about Diego, about what really happened before you left. They know about the hospital records, about the doctor's mistakes, about why you really came to New York." Maria's blood ran cold. "What did you tell them?" I told them the truth, that you blame yourself for Diego's death because you stopped fighting the doctors, that you came to America to save another child the way you couldn't save your own son." After hanging up, Maria sat in her small room. Staring at a photograph of Diego she kept hidden in her prayer book. Tomorrow, Jonathan would receive a report that might destroy her credibility with the medical team. Soon, he would also receive a private investigator's report that would reveal her deepest secrets and motivations. But tonight, she had a decision to make. She could play it safe, follow the doctor's recommendations, and hope Gerald's improvements would continue gradually. Or she could take the biggest risk of her life and attempt something that would either prove her grandmother's wisdom once and for all, or cost her everything she'd worked to build with the Patterson family. In her suitcase, she still had enough of her grandmother's strongest herbs for one final treatment, a combination so potent that it had been used only once before, on Diego, in his final days. It hadn't saved her son because she'd started too late, but it might just give Gerald the miracle he needed. The question was whether she had the courage to risk another child's life on faith, hope, and the memory of an old woman's wisdom passed down through generations of healers who had learned to see beyond what modern medicine deemed possible. The private investigator's report arrived at 7 a.m. on Wednesday, delivered by courier to Jonathan's home office. As he read through the detailed background check on Maria Santos, Jonathan felt his world shift once again. Subject: Maria Elena Santos, age 28, San Salvador, El Salvador. Previous employment: private caregiver for disabled children. Family status: lost only child, Diego Santos, age 4. To complications from undiagnosed inflammatory neuropathy, reason for departure, terminated from last position after disagreement with supervising physicians regarding traditional treatments. Additional notes: Diego's autopsy revealed condition was treatable with anti-inflammatory interventions. Hospital records indicate family requested traditional remedies, which were denied. Jonathan's hands trembled as he read the final paragraph. Subject appears to have relocated to United States specifically to work with disabled children, possibly motivated by unresolved grief and desire to succeed where she failed with her own child. The sound of Gerald's laughter echoed from the kitchen, where Maria was preparing his breakfast. Jonathan closed the report and walked slowly toward the sound, his mind reeling with the implications of what he'd just learned. In the kitchen, Gerald was sitting in his high chair, excitedly telling Maria about a dream he'd had. "And in my dream, I was running so fast that I could fly. Do you think that means something, Miss Maria?" "Dreams are messages from our hearts," Maria said, stirring something aromatic into Gerald's orange juice. "They tell us what our souls remember, even when our minds forget." Jonathan noticed the small vial of herbs Maria quickly tucked into her apron pocket. His protective instincts warred with his desperate hope for his son's recovery. "Maria, could I speak with you for a moment?" he asked quietly. In his office, Jonathan spread the investigator's report across his desk. Maria's face went pale as she recognized the documents from Diego's medical file. "You lost your own son," Jonathan said, his voice gentle but firm. "You came here not just for work, but because of him." Maria sat down heavily, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "Yes," she whispered. "Diego had the same condition as Gerald, the doctors in El Salvador. They were wrong about so many things. They said he couldn't be helped, that traditional medicine was superstition. I listened to them. I stopped fighting for what I knew in my heart could work." Tears ran down her cheeks as she continued. "When Diego died, I found out the truth. My grandmother's remedies weren't folklore. They were medicine that could have saved him. So I came here to save Gerald. Because I couldn't save my own child." Jonathan felt his anger dissolve into understanding. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you wouldn't have trusted someone driven by grief to care for your son. But Mr. Patterson, my grief doesn't make me wrong about Gerald. It makes me more determined to be right. Before Jonathan could respond, they heard Gerald calling from the kitchen. "Daddy, Miss Maria, come quick, something amazing is happening." They rushed to find Gerald standing beside his chair, holding onto the table for support, but bearing weight on both legs. "I got up by myself," Gerald announced proudly. They just remembered how." Dr. Chen's phone call came 30 minutes later. "Mr. Patterson, we need to discuss Gerald's test results immediately. Can you come to my office this morning?" At the medical center, Dr. Chen spread Gerald's latest scans and test results across her desk with an expression Jonathan had never seen before, a mixture of confusion, excitement, and scientific bafflement. "Jonathan, I've been practicing neurology for 15 years. I've seen thousands of cases of cerebral palsy, degenerative conditions, and developmental delays. What I'm looking at in Gerald's results shouldn't be possible." She pointed to brain scans side by side. "This is Gerald's MRI from 6 months ago. This is yesterday's scan. Look at the neural pathway activity in his motor cortex. It's not just improved, it's completely transformed." Jonathan studied the colorful brain images, seeing differences even his untrained eye could detect. "What does this mean?" "It means Gerald's brain is rewiring itself. New neural pathways are forming. Dormant areas are activating, and damaged connections are somehow healing. From a neurological standpoint, your son is experiencing what we would classify as a spontaneous recovery. Except those don't happen with Gerald's specific condition." Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair. "Jonathan, I need to ask you directly, what exactly has Maria been doing with Gerald?" That afternoon, Jonathan made a decision that would change everything. Instead of restricting Maria's treatments, he asked her to teach him everything her grandmother had known about healing children like Gerald. "If there's even a chance that this could help my son," he said, "I want to understand it completely." But neither of them knew that Dr. Chen had already made her own decision. She'd contacted colleagues at Johns Hopkins and Columbia, sharing Gerald's case files with leading researchers in pediatric neurology. By evening, Gerald Patterson had become the subject of intense medical interest, and the Patterson family was about to become the center of a controversy that would pit traditional medicine against ancient wisdom in the most public way possible. The call from Johns Hopkins came at midnight, waking Jonathan from the first peaceful sleep he'd had in years. Dr. Richard Steinberg, one of the country's leading pediatric neurologists, had reviewed Gerald's files and wanted to study his case immediately. "Mr. Patterson, what's happening with your son could revolutionize our understanding of neural plasticity in children. We need to document every aspect of his treatment protocol before these improvements plateau or reverse." Within 48 hours, the Patterson mansion had transformed into an informal research facility. Medical teams from 3 major hospitals set up monitoring equipment, while Maria continued her traditional treatments under careful observation. Gerald, meanwhile, was thriving under the attention. He demonstrated his standing ability for amazed doctors while chattering about his favorite books and his dreams of learning to ride a bicycle. "Look, Dr. Sarah," Gerald called to one of the researchers, a young neurologist from Columbia. "Miss Maria taught me to stand up really tall to see over mountains, Doctor." Sarah Martinez watched in fascination as Gerald, with minimal support, rose from his crawling position to stand for nearly 2 minutes. "Maria, can you explain exactly what you're doing during these exercises?" Maria demonstrated her technique, the gentle massage, the herbal preparations, the storytelling that engaged Gerald's imagination while his body worked to remember its capabilities. But it was her explanation that captivated the medical team. "In my country, we believe healing happens in layers," Maria said, working with Gerald's legs as she spoke. "First, the body must remember it wants to heal. Then it must remember how to heal. Finally, it must remember why to heal. Western medicine often tries to force the how without awakening the want or the why. Dr. Martinez made extensive notes. The neuroplasticity we're seeing in Gerald's scans supports this theory. His brain isn't just repairing, it's reorganizing based on new sensory input and emotional motivation. But the medical attention brought unexpected complications. News of Gerald's case leaked to medical journals, then to health blogs, and finally to mainstream media. Within a week, the Manhattan Miracle Boy was featured on morning talk shows, and the Patterson home was besieged by reporters wanting to interview the housekeeper who had accomplished what million-dollar medical treatments couldn't. Jonathan tried to shield Gerald from the chaos, but the 5-year-old was fascinated by all the visitors and attention. "Daddy, are we famous because I can stand up now?" The publicity attracted another kind of visitor, desperate parents from across the country, bringing their own disabled children and begging Maria to help them. Jonathan found families camping outside their gates, holding signs asking for the miracle cure. "This is getting out of control," Jonathan told Maria as they watched news crews set up across the street. "Maybe we should take Gerald somewhere private until this dies down." But Maria was studying the faces of the parents outside their gates, expressions she recognized from her own mirrors during Diego's illness. "Mr. Patterson, these families are suffering the way we both have. If there's a chance Gerald's healing could help other children." "You can't save every child in the world, Maria." "No," Maria said quietly, "but maybe I can save more than just Gerald." That evening, Maria made a proposal that would test Jonathan's commitment to his son's recovery and his trust in her judgment. "I want to document everything properly," she said. "Work with the doctors to create a real protocol that other families could use. But I need you to understand something. This might mean Gerald becomes a case study instead of just our little boy." Jonathan looked out at the crowds of hopeful parents and worried medical professionals surrounding their home. "What are you really asking me, Maria?" "I'm asking you to let Gerald's miracle become bigger than just our family. To let his healing help change how doctors think about treating children like him. But it means taking risks we've never considered." What Maria didn't tell Jonathan was that she'd received a call from her mother that afternoon. Back in El Salvador, word of Gerald's recovery had reached Diego's former doctors. They wanted to interview her about the treatments that had failed to save her son, but were now helping Gerald thrive. For the first time since Diego's death, Maria was being asked to revisit the exact medical decisions that had haunted her for 3 years. The doctors, who had dismissed her grandmother's wisdom as superstition, now wanted to understand why those same techniques were producing miraculous results in New York. But reopening Diego's case would mean confronting truths about his death that might destroy her hard-won peace, and potentially undermine her credibility with Gerald's medical team just when they were beginning to trust her methods. The choice Maria faced would determine not only Gerald's future, but whether she could finally transform her grief into a legacy that might prevent other families from losing what she had lost. The confrontation with Diego's former medical team took place via video conference on a grey February morning. Dr. Hector Ramirez and Dr. Patricia Vega, the pediatric specialists who had treated Diego in San Salvador, appeared on Jonathan's computer screen with expressions that mixed professional curiosity with unmistakable defensiveness. "Senora Santos," Dr. Ramirez began formally, "we've reviewed the documentation from your work in New York. We need to understand why you believe traditional methods are succeeding with Gerald Patterson when conventional treatment failed with your son." Maria sat beside Jonathan in his office, her hands steady despite the emotional storm this conversation was stirring. Gerald was in the living room with one of the research assistants. blissfully unaware that his progress was forcing a reckoning with his caregiver's deepest trauma. "You want to know why Gerald is walking and Diego died," Maria said simply. "The answer is timing, dosage, and belief." She pulled out Diego's medical files, documents she'd carried from El Salvador like sacred artifacts. "Diego's inflammatory markers were identical to Gerald's when I started treatment, but you convinced me to wait, to try conventional approaches first. By the time I insisted on my grandmother's remedies, the window for neural recovery had nearly closed." Dr. Vega shifted uncomfortably. "Senora Santos, we followed established protocols. Your son's condition was complex. My son's condition was treatable," Maria interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "The autopsy confirmed it. The anti-inflammatory compounds in the herbs I wanted to use could have reduced the neural swelling that caused his paralysis, but you dismissed them as folklore without investigation." Jonathan watched this exchange with growing understanding. Maria wasn't just treating Gerald, she was fighting for vindication of the medical knowledge that could have saved her own child. Dr. Ramirez leaned forward. "What exactly are you using with the American boy?" Maria spent the next hour detailing her protocols, the specific herbs, the timing of treatments, the integration of traditional techniques with modern monitoring. But it was her explanation of the emotional component that seemed to surprise the doctors most. "Healing requires hope," Maria said. "Gerald believes his body can remember how to walk, because I believe it too. Diego lost hope because his doctors had already lost it." After the call ended, Jonathan found himself looking at Maria with new respect and heartbreak. "You've been carrying this guilt for 3 years. "Not guilt," Maria corrected. "Responsibility. There's a difference." That afternoon brought unexpected visitors. Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Pan American Health Organization had flown in from Washington, D.C., along with Dr. Michael Chen from the National Institutes of Health. They'd come to investigate whether Maria's traditional treatments represented a breakthrough that could help thousands of children across Latin America. "Miss Santos," Dr. Vasquez said, as they observed Gerald's afternoon exercises, "if your protocols prove effective in clinical trials, we could potentially help children in rural areas who don't have access to expensive neurological treatments." Gerald, now able to stand for 5-minute intervals with minimal support, was demonstrating his progress while chattering happily about his plans to learn skateboarding. His joy was infectious, and even the most skeptical observers found themselves smiling at his enthusiasm. But it was Dr. Chen who asked the question that would change everything. "Maria, would you be willing to return to El Salvador to work with Diego's former medical team, to develop a pilot program that combines traditional healing with modern monitoring?" The room went silent. Jonathan felt his heart sink, realizing what this opportunity might mean for Gerald's continued progress. "You're asking me to leave Gerald," Maria said quietly. "We're asking you to help develop a program that could save hundreds of children like Gerald," Dr. Vasquez replied. "Your knowledge, combined with proper medical oversight, could revolutionize pediatric neurology in underserved communities." That evening, after the officials had left, Maria sat with Gerald during his bedtime routine. The little boy, tired from his day of demonstrations, snuggled against her as she read his favorite story. "Miss Maria," Gerald said sleepily, "are you going to teach other kids to stand up like me?" "Would you like me to help other children?" Maria asked. Gerald considered this seriously. "Yes, but I want you to come back. You're the best storyteller in the whole world." Later that night, Maria called her mother in El Salvador. "Mama, they want me to come home, to work with the doctors who let Diego die." "And what does your heart tell you, Misha?" Maria looked through her window at the Manhattan skyline, thinking about Gerald's progress, about the desperate families still gathered outside their gates, about the opportunity to transform Diego's death into a legacy of healing. My heart tells me that Diego died so Gerald could live. And maybe Gerald learned to walk so other children won't have to crawl. Oh, but what Maria couldn't have known was that her decision would soon be taken out of her hands entirely. The next morning would bring news that would force her to choose between Gerald's continued progress and a chance to save her own life. Because the real reason she'd left El Salvador wasn't just Diego's death. It was a dangerous secret that had been following her across 2 countries and 3 years of careful hiding. The revelation came through a phone call at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning. Maria's sister Rosa was sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "Maria, you have to come home immediately. They know where you are. Carlos found out about the American boy on the news, and he's coming for you." Maria's blood turned to ice. Carlos Mendoza, Diego's father, the man whose violence had driven her from El Salvador, whose threats had made it impossible for her to mourn her son properly, the man she'd crossed 2 countries to escape. "How did he find me?" Maria whispered, glancing toward Gerald's room, where the little boy slept peacefully. The news stories, the interviews with the doctors from the hospital. Your picture is everywhere. He saw it and told everyone you stole money from Diego's medical fund before you left. Maria, he's convinced people you let Diego die on purpose so you could take the money and start a new life. Jonathan found Maria in the kitchen at dawn, packing her belongings with shaking hands. "Maria, what's happening?" he asked, alarmed by her frantic movements. "I have to leave," she said without looking up. "Today, before Gerald wakes up." "Leave? Why, Gerald needs you. We need you." Maria finally met his eyes, and Jonathan saw terror there that had nothing to do with medical procedures or treatment protocols. "There are things about my past that I haven't told you. Dangerous things. If I stay, I'll put Gerald at risk." She explained about Carlos, about the domestic violence that had overshadowed Diego's illness, about the threats that had forced her to flee her own country while she was still grieving her child's death. "He told people I stole from Diego's medical fund," Maria said, her voice breaking. "It's not true, but he has friends who will help him make trouble if he comes here. If there's any scandal connected to Gerald's treatment," Jonathan felt protective fury rise in his chest. "Then we'll get a restraining order. We'll hire security. Maria, you can't run again." "You don't understand," Maria said desperately. "Carlos doesn't respect legal documents. And if he makes public accusations about me stealing money or harming Diego, every doctor involved in Gerald's case will distance themselves from our methods, the research, the hope for other children. It will all be destroyed." At 8 a.m., Gerald woke up and found Maria's room empty except for a letter addressed to him. Jonathan had to read it aloud because Gerald was crying too hard to make out the words himself. "Mi querido Gerald, you are the bravest boy I have ever known. Your legs remembered how to be strong because your heart was always strong. Keep practicing your standing, keep believing in your dreams, and never forget that you can do anything you set your mind to. I have to go help other children now, but I will never forget you. Con amor." Miss Maria Gerald was inconsolable. He refused to eat, wouldn't attempt his exercises, and spent the day crawling around the house calling for Maria. By evening, Jonathan realized that Gerald's emotional state was affecting his physical progress. Without Maria's encouragement and belief, the little boy seemed to be losing faith in his own abilities. That night, Jonathan made a decision that would either save Maria's life or destroy Gerald's progress forever. He called his head of security and his legal team. "I need a security detail capable of international protection, and I need lawyers familiar with both immigration law and domestic violence cases, whatever it costs." Then he called Maria's cell phone, though it went straight to voicemail. Maria, Gerald won't eat. He won't try to stand. He keeps asking when you're coming home. I don't know much about domestic violence or international law, but I know that you saved my son's life, and now I'm going to save yours. Come back to us. We'll face whatever comes together. Unknown to Jonathan, Maria was already on a plane to El Salvador, carrying Gerald's picture in her pocket and a heart full of determination to confront Carlos once and for all. She'd realized during the flight that running hadn't protected Diego, and running again wouldn't protect Gerald. But what she didn't know was that Carlos had never actually left El Salvador. The threats, the danger, the reason she'd fled, all of it had been orchestrated by someone else entirely. Someone who had been watching her success with Gerald from the beginning and saw an opportunity to destroy both her credibility and her happiness in one devastating blow. The person who had called Rosa, pretending to be Carlos, was about to reveal themselves in a way that would test every relationship Maria had built and every truth she thought she knew about Diego's death, her own past, and the real reason she'd been led to Gerald Patterson at exactly the moment when they both needed saving. The truth unraveled in the most unlikely place, the waiting room of San Salvador's Children's Hospital, where Maria had come to confront Carlos and clear her name. Instead of her former partner, she found Dr. Patricia Vega waiting for her with a manila folder and an expression of profound guilt. "Maria, we need to talk," Dr. Vega said quietly. "Carlos isn't coming. He never made those threats. It was me." Maria stared at the woman who had been Diego's primary physician, confusion and betrayal warring in her chest. "What are you talking about?" Dr. Vega led her to a private consultation room, the same room where Maria had received the news of Diego's death 3 years earlier. "When your success with the American boy started making international news, I panicked. The medical board began asking questions about Diego's treatment, about why we dismissed your grandmother's remedies." She opened the folder to reveal documents Maria had never seen before, research papers dating back decades, studies on the anti-inflammatory properties of the exact herbs Maria's grandmother had wanted to use on Diego. "We knew," Dr. Vega said, her voice barely a whisper. "We knew your traditional methods had scientific backing, but the hospital administration was under pressure to modernize, to move away from anything that seemed like folk medicine. They made it clear that doctors who entertained primitive treatments wouldn't advance their careers." Maria felt the world tilt around her. "You let Diego die to protect your career. I convinced myself we were following best practices. But when Diego's condition worsened and you begged us to try the herbal treatments, I knew we should have listened. By then it was too late. Admitting error would have ended not just my career, but Dr. Ramirez's too." The betrayal cut deeper than Carlos's violence ever had. "So you made me think Carlos was coming for me? You destroyed my chance to help Gerald because you were afraid of being exposed, Doctor." Vega's composure cracked completely. "When your methods started gaining recognition in America, I realized the truth about Diego would eventually come out. I thought if you disappeared quietly, the questions would stop. I never meant for you to suffer more. I was a coward." Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. "Gerald stood for 10 minutes today, but he keeps asking when you're coming home. The medical team says his progress is stalling without you. Please come back." Attached was a photo of Gerald holding a sign he'd made. "Miss Maria, I miss you. Love, Gerald." That evening, Maria sat in the small church where she'd prayed for Diego during his final days. The weight of Dr. Vega's confession, combined with Gerald's need and her own exhaustion, seemed unbearable. But as she knelt in the candlelight, Maria realized something profound. Diego's death had meaning now, his struggle, their shared pain. The medical knowledge she'd gained fighting for him, all of it had prepared her to save Gerald. Diego's legacy wasn't in the lawsuit she could now file against the hospital or in the vindication Dr. Vega's confession provided. Diego's legacy was in every step Gerald would take. The next morning, Maria called Jonathan. "I'm coming home," she said simply. "Thank God. Gerald will be so happy. Are you safe? What happened with Carlos?" "Carlos was never the threat, but I'll explain everything when I get there. Right now, I just want to see Gerald try to walk again." But Maria's return to New York would bring one final challenge. During her absence, the research team studying Gerald's case had made a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about his condition and about the real source of his miraculous recovery. Dr. Martinez had been analyzing Gerald's latest brain scans when she noticed something extraordinary. The neural pathway development they'd attributed to Maria's treatments had actually begun before Maria arrived at the Patterson mansion. Gerald's brain had been rewiring itself for months, possibly since birth, waiting for the right emotional catalyst to activate dormant healing mechanisms. Maria's treatments hadn't caused Gerald's recovery. They had simply awakened a healing process that was already encoded in his remarkable brain. The herbs, the stories, the belief, the love, they were the key that unlocked Gerald's own miraculous potential for self-healing. When Maria walked back into the Patterson mansion 3 days later, Gerald was waiting by the door, and for the first time in his 5 years of life, he didn't crawl toward her. He walked. Gerald Patterson took his first independent steps on a Tuesday morning in March 2024, walking 12 feet from the living room doorway directly into Maria's arms. No support, no hesitation, no looking back at the crawling life he was leaving behind. "Miss Maria!" he shouted as she caught him in her embrace, both of them crying with joy. "I kept practicing like you said. I walked all by myself." Jonathan, who had been documenting Gerald's progress with his phone camera, captured the moment that would soon become the final piece of evidence in the most remarkable medical case study of the decade. Dr. Martinez and her research team had spent Maria's absence analyzing every aspect of Gerald's recovery. Their findings, which they shared that afternoon, revolutionized understanding of pediatric neuroplasticity and the role of emotional catalysts in healing. "Gerald's brain has been preparing for this recovery since birth," Dr. Martinez explained, showing detailed scans and charts. "What we initially thought was severe developmental delay was actually a complex neural reorganization process. His brain was building alternative pathways, waiting for the right conditions to activate them." She pointed to specific areas on Gerald's latest brain scans. Maria's treatments provided 3 crucial elements: physical stimulation that awakened dormant neural networks, emotional support that gave Gerald permission to believe in his own healing, and most importantly, the profound bond between them that activated reward pathways in his brain associated with motivation and hope. Maria listened with wonder as Dr. Martinez continued. "The herbs reduced inflammation, yes, but their primary function was creating sensory experiences that helped Gerald's brain integrate new movement patterns. The stories weren't just entertainment. They gave his developing mind a framework for imagining physical capabilities he'd never experienced." Jonathan shook his head in amazement. "So you're saying Gerald could always have walked?" "We're saying Gerald's brain was always capable of supporting walking, but it needed the right combination of physical, emotional, and psychological inputs to unlock that potential. Maria provided all 3. The research team's findings would eventually be published in the New England Journal of Medicine, leading to revolutionary changes in pediatric neurology treatment protocols. But more immediately, they vindicated both Maria's traditional healing methods and Dr. Vega's eventual confession about Diego's case. Within 6 months, Maria found herself at the center of an international initiative to integrate traditional healing wisdom with modern medical practice. She split her time between New York, where she continued working with Gerald and training other therapists, and El Salvador, where she established a clinic combining her grandmother's methods with proper medical oversight. Gerald, meanwhile, progressed from walking to running to climbing to every physical activity he'd ever dreamed of attempting. By his 6th birthday, he was indistinguishable from any other energetic child, except for his extraordinary empathy for others facing physical challenges. "Miss Maria," Gerald said one evening as they watched the sunset from Central Park, where he'd just spent the afternoon playing soccer with other children, "do you think Diego is happy that I can run now?" Maria felt the familiar ache in her heart transform into something lighter, not the absence of grief, but the presence of purpose. "I think Diego is very proud that his story helped us save yours. And now we can help other kids too, right?" "Yes, mi amor. We can help other children remember that their bodies know how to heal, just like yours did." Jonathan, watching this exchange, realized that the miracle hadn't been Gerald's recovery alone. The miracle had been the transformation of Maria's grief into a gift that would help countless families avoid the loss she had endured. Dr. Vega eventually faced professional censure for her role in Diego's death, but she also became one of the most vocal advocates for integrating traditional healing methods into hospital protocols. Her public confession led to policy changes that would prevent future children from suffering Diego's fate. Carlos Mendoza, when Maria finally contacted him to explain what had really happened, broke down in tears and asked her forgiveness for his violence during Diego's illness. His grief and guilt had made him desperate to blame someone, and Maria had been the easiest target. Their reconciliation was painful, but healing for both of them. 2 years after Gerald's first steps, the Patterson family established the Diego Santos Foundation for Pediatric Healing Research, funding studies that bridged traditional and modern medicine. Maria served as its director, ensuring that no child would be denied potentially life-saving treatments because they didn't fit conventional medical categories. Gerald, now 7 and planning to be a doctor who helps kids remember how to walk, often accompanied Maria to the Foundation's events. His story had become a beacon of hope for families facing impossible diagnoses, proof that miracles could emerge from the intersection of love, faith, and the courage to believe in healing beyond what medicine deemed possible. On quiet evenings in the Patterson mansion, Gerald would still ask Maria to tell him stories. Not the magical tales that had helped him learn to walk, but true stories about his friend Diego, whose memory lived on in every child they helped, every family they healed, and every step Gerald took toward a future filled with infinite possibility. The miracle hadn't been in the healing itself, but in the love that made healing possible, the grief that transformed into purpose, and the profound truth that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the deepest sorrows, waiting for the right moment to reveal their hidden light.